Okay, all right. Hello, everyone. Can you still see the screen, by the way? Just it's looking good, right? Okay.
Yes, I can see it in not
because-
in full presentation mode.
Now?
Yeah, perfect. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, well, hello, everyone. My name is Yasemin Kor. I'm at the Judge Business School here at Cambridge. It's a pleasure to present in the same session with Tejas. And so we think that our topics are different, but also complementary in some ways. I believe he's going to talk about protecting farmers and planet. And my topic is also on if you think of organic food as one way to protect farmers and planet, except that I'm going to be looking at more from the company's perspective, as well as from looking at the role of the CEOs in specifically this is the chief executive, so from a managerial perspective, how do CEOs' experiences influence the decision of food companies to enter and expand in the organic food segment? And in a nutshell, we find that when CEOs possess both firm-specific and versatile experiences, that's when firms are more likely to expand in organic food. So, as I mentioned, as part of my research, I do research on a number of topics, but management and the chief executives is one of these topics. And of course, I've been very interested in sustainable food systems. And with my co-author, Danchi Ten, she's in Taiwan National Chengchi University. This was the context that we have been fascinated with, but also we have a long-standing research on companies and their growth. And one of the theories in this particular area highlights the central role of managers, and in particular, how their ability to think of new ways to deploy existing resources of the company enables growth. And in this particular process, it's their experience and experiential knowledge that shapes the managerial imagination about and judgment about, how they can go about utilizing resources in novel ways. So in this literature, there's been a lot of emphasis on the role of firm-specific managerial experience, and that is the experience managers have accumulated in a particular company and industry context before they become a CEO. And the literature has both, in terms of theoretical arguments and also empirical evidence, suggest positive, negative effects of firm-specific experience. So on the positive side, this experience is viewed as essential in both identifying but also implementing a unique growth trajectory. So not a generic one, but basically one that helps the company to build on its resources and capabilities, because we think of each company unique in terms of its strengths and weaknesses. So the more the manager is knowledgeable and expert in that domain, it's a better matching process, if you will, matching the company with a specific set of opportunities. But on the negative side, of course, the longer a manager has spent time in a specific context, the more specialized the human capital, the knowledge, skills, the cognitive lenses become to that specific domain, and some entrenchment is possible in terms of in a particular strategy, and that can further reduce the managerial skills, but also the motivation to explore and move into other types of growth domains. So, with these in mind, what we wanted to ask, in terms of at a theoretical level is, how can companies actually harvest these benefits? It's apparently firm-specific experience is essential, but how do you harness the benefits while you avoid the negative effects? And to tackle this, we asked, okay, so maybe are there any other types of managerial experiences that might be complementary and synergistic when it's combined with firm-specific experience. And so what we decided to consider is this notion of versatile experience. And this is the type of experience that can help to increase the versatility. And that's like the adaptability of managers' human capital, so they can be more versatile in trying to redeploy the firm's resources to generate new growth. Here, it's a versatile experience is what they do as a mechanism is they expose managers to different knowledge domains, which then expand their cognitive repertoire, as well as their managerial ability. So when they see opportunities, growth opportunities in the environment, they don't have this very narrow lenses, but they actually use multiple lenses to be able to identify the opportunities from the environment. So they're more entrepreneurially alert. They also have greater managerial ability in terms of having a sort of like a richer chest of ideas, methods, solutions. And then all of that in combination makes them more motivated, and more open-minded, because in part they perceive lower risk of failure because they know that if they go into that space, they can be adaptable. So we can talk about the company being adaptable, but without the leadership being open and adaptable, it's much less likely to happen. So, and we looked at versatile experience as a multidimensional concept in terms of industry, geography, function. So in terms of exposure to different knowledge domains, it can come from experience in different industries, different geographies, and different business functions. So more specifically, we focused on the managers' related industry experience. So that could be like for the food industry, that could be experience in upstream and downstream. It could be on the agricultural side, it could be on the food retail side, or horizontally related might mean personal care products where they also have organic trend. And the importance is that we didn't consider very far distant domains, different unrelated industries, because at the end of the day, they need to be able to bring back that knowledge to the current industry. It has to be transferable. We've looked at international management experience, which does expose managers to a wide variety of global trends, practices, cultural, economic, and legal environments. And then in terms of experience in multiple functions, so within business, we have these different functions: finance, accounting, marketing, operations, HR. So, and this one is about to what extent the manager is quite narrowly specialized in a particular function, only one function, versus it actually has experience in multiple of these areas. And that matters because when thinking of a specific growth opportunity, then the CEO can think of this opportunity from multiple functional angles, and then think about how to adapt the company's capabilities for growth. So in terms of course, the research setting is very relevant to the current presentation and the audience, in this group. And the setting is the U.S. organic food segment. And we specifically looked at entry and growth in the organic certified food. So this particular space is, of course, not companies just calling anything they want organic, which can be an issue, but we're talking about 100% organic certified. So companies have to go through a rigorous third-party certification. And the dates that we're looking at it's a year of 11 years of span from 97 to 2007, and that those are linked to the dates of the legislation. Organic Food Product Act was published in the Federal Register in 97, and so that's when we start. We continue all the way through 2002 when it was enacted, and another 5 years. And we have studied all publicly trading food manufacturing companies. There are about 46 of them over the time period, which gave us over 400 observations. I should also point out that it's this particular organic food production, of course, comes with risks and challenges. It can be a difficult and lengthy transitions on the agricultural side, going from conventional to organic farming. And especially at the time of the study, there was actually insufficient supply of raw organic foods at a large scale. So, it's not as simple as just calling up some suppliers and ordering things in very large quantities. That actually manufacturing companies themselves needed to get into development of the organic supply chains. So it involves a lot of organizational change. And organic products, of course, typically can be sold at a premium, but again, not something to be taken for granted because profit margins actually can vary by product, as well as based on the specific farm's efficiency. And they tend to be susceptible to economic cycles, meaning that the demand can actually go down dramatically during downturns. So overall, we sort of, from the company's point of view, food manufacturing companies' point of view, this is a growth opportunity, but it comes with some significant implementation risks and outcome uncertainty. And I think it's reflected in the numbers, throughout the study period. What we have observed is that of all the companies, it's actually 41% responded to the organic food opportunity, and 59%, the majority, did not. So is basically we've done a panel of logistics regression analysis, and the dependent variable is the likelihood that a firm responds to organic food opportunity during any given year. We looked at response could take place through greenfield investments. What that is basically company setting up its own organic foods, or it can happen through acquisition of other companies that already have developed organic certified products. So both of them counted. And I have mentioned the independent variables. We have the firm-specific experience of the CEO, and we look at 3 types of versatile experience: related industry, international management experience, and multifunction experience. And we have a bunch of control variables in here. So we're testing basically 3 hypotheses about these interaction effects. It's the combination of versatile and firm-specific experience that results in higher likelihood of the company pursuing organic growth. So there's a big table, but I'm going to show a smaller version where you could see the testing of the 3 interaction effects. And we found that it's marked with the asterisks, 2 out of 3 of them were actually statistically supported. And I'll explain those 2 effects. So the first effect we try to illustrate here is what you see on the horizontal axis is the CEO's firm-specific experience. It goes, increases as you go towards the right. And then on the vertical axis is the probability of pursuing organic food. And so what's interesting here is, of course, we're looking at the interaction effect, and the bottom 2 lines that you do see are basically the lines where the relationship between CEO firm-specific experience and the pursuing organic growth is a negative link, right? And so these are the 2 lines when the CEO has 0 or only 1 year of related industry experience, right? So then it's a negative relationship overall. When the CEO has 4 years of related experience, then it's the next line. This is mean plus 1 standard deviation in terms of related industry experience. The relationship is actually becomes flat. So that negative effect is alleviated, if you will. And if we actually see even a higher level of related experience, like as high as 7 years, then we actually see a positive relationship. So the relationship turned into a highly synergistic combination. And we also saw somewhat similar effect in the second, is actually the third one, the interaction between multifunction experience and firm-specific experience here. When the CEO has 0 or 1 additional functional experience, it's a negative relationship. If when CEO has two additional functional experiences, then the relationship becomes a positive one. So what we are concluding basically in terms of our findings is that, so we find that firms can escape this growth constraining effects of firm-specific experience when the CEO also possesses versatile experiences, and that's the related industry and multifunction where we find these effects. And interestingly, by itself, the CEO versatile experience doesn't actually result in expected positive effect on organic food entry and growth. It's when these two things are combined, firms actually achieve the higher rates of pursuit. So what we basically then interpret this is that what's needed is the combination of both an in-depth understanding of the company and industry, and also the adaptability to pursue growth in these new domains. And that's basically the story of entry and organic growth in the organic food segment. So I think that's pretty much all I want to say, and I can take questions now. I think, is that what we're doing, Francesca, or are we taking questions at the end?
Should we have Tejas first? I mean, next, and then we sort of
great.
try also to find
Okay.
a connection between the two and open the discussion. Should we do that?
Yeah.
Is it okay with you?
Yeah, perfect.
Yes. Great. Thank you so much, Yasemin.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Yasemin. That was a really interesting presentation, and I do think that there's a lot of overlap with things that I'm thinking about and working on in general from a different perspective altogether, because the private sector's impact on organic production, something that is examined and comes under closer scrutiny than I think the public sector's does. But we should actually take these lessons into the public domain as well, in terms of whom we appoint in a lot of spaces. But I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to discuss that in a bit more depth. So hi everyone, I'm Tejas Rao. I'm currently a second year PhD candidate at the Department of Land Economy, and I'm also affiliated with C-EENRG, the Center for Energy, Environment and Natural Resources Governance. I also serve as the manager for the Center for International Sustainable Development Law, and the broad strokes of my research are on the political economy of environmental negotiations. I'm typically interested in what lawyers do in environmental negotiations. I'm a lawyer myself, and I try to understand why lawyers show up in places that they shouldn't necessarily be. Is the simplest way that I put my research. But today's presentation and the focus of my presentation today is on one aspect of what I think is going to become extremely relevant at COP28, particularly because the last COP was in a North African country, and we're moving to the Middle East, and then we're going to Eastern Europe simultaneously, while the rest of the COPs, the biodiversity COPs, are also coming to this region. It's supposed to happen in Turkey next year. Turkey is just withdrawn because of the earthquakes, and it may happen in Canada, but they're searching for another host. And the Desertification Convention COP is happening in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And there's a general shift where all of these conventions are now meeting in places that are far more arid, far more drought prone, and they are far more impacted by weather events that go the other way, as compared to what we think about floods and sea level rise. There is a real danger over here that I think gets under-examined. So I'll start sharing my screen with that sort of context for my research and start presenting. So I hope my PPT is visible. I know it's not in presentation mode, but that's just because of the layout of my screen. So I hope this will be all right with everyone. So the talk today is titled Protecting Farmers and the Planet, Food Security, Organic Production Ahead of UNFCCC COP28. What I hope to do with you over the next 10 to 12 minutes is to give you a brief introduction to food security and farmers framing under the UNFCCC in the way that I see it, go over a few major decisions relating to food security at UNFCCC conventions of the parties meetings in past years, go over major outcomes that came out of the last meeting, which took place in Egypt, and then anticipate a few outcomes related to food security in particular at COP28. And finally, I'll conclude with a relationship of these decisions to other COPs and suggest why I think it's so vital that we keep ourselves abreast with the developments across this trifecta of international negotiations, particularly in terms of the kind of impact it can have on the private sector. So that's the broad gist of what I'll be speaking about. To start off, just looking at the UNFCCC's role in food security, this is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And I think most people are aware of the instrument by reference to the Paris Agreement, which is probably more colloquially known. But the Paris Agreement, of course, comes as a add-on treaty to the initial Framework Convention that got agreed in 1992. And I think for the purposes of this afternoon, it perhaps is enough to know, from my context at least, that the primary objective of the UNFCCC is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations and prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. This is the way I contextualize the UNFCCC in most things. This clearly impacts, I think, agriculture at large. I think there is a huge relation to food security and agriculture as a result of this, because while it may seem initially detached, these goals are extended because climate change driven by fluctuating greenhouse gas levels directly influences agricultural productivity. And any efforts that are done, therefore, under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change indirectly but significantly can impact our global capacity to achieve food security. Clara's spoken about this, I think, at a previous food security seminar, and I know that there's a lot of research around the university at large about how climate efforts have to align with food security responses. But the range of the impacts, I don't think I see little generalized literature going into these impacts. The generalized literature, I think, focuses on trying to make broad stroke sweeping comments about these impacts without going into the nitty-gritty. But I think we see that with unpredictability in weather patterns, which lead to variable and I think often reduced crop yields at the moment, this poses a huge challenge, especially for regions that are heavily reliant on agriculture. And a lot of um, countries that are not as further along on their development trajectory and are still heavily reliant on agricultural processes are the ones that are at the most risk over here. And if you look at the map, these frequently align with the countries that are at the most climate vulnerable risk as well. So there's a huge issue over there. Additionally, we're also witnessing increasing instances of water scarcity as well as soil degradation, both of which are critical components for any successful farming or any successful food production that takes place. Perhaps most at risk over here are small scale and traditional farmers who may lack the resources to adapt to these rapid environmental changes. Small scale and traditional farmers often also rely upon traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge, which harnesses the value of nature in a way that does not account for this level of human interference with the environment, something that has taken place far more recently than we decide to imagine that it has. This heightened risk to farmers obviously directly impacts food's insecurity, and I think is likely to create food insecurity all around the world, something that we're already seeing. The UNFCCC, however, provides some scale or some vocabulary or some framing for what can actually take place, particularly to support farmers in adapting to changing climatic conditions. There are specific adaptation programs that are aimed at helping farmers adjust their practices to these new climate realities, which include developing and disseminating drought resistant crop varieties around the world, which are crucial for maintaining yields in drier conditions. Additionally, the UNFCCC emphasizes capacity building and the transfer of sustainable agricultural technologies. This is through the transfer of technology provisions, and lawyers are quick to point out the fact that this is an obligation incumbent on all state parties. These efforts are designed to equip farmers with the knowledge and tools necessary for climate resilient farming. A key aspect also of these initiatives is the promotion of organic farming practices. We're starting to see this take place more in the best practices capacity building space where, because organic farming is more resilient to climate change and has a significantly lower environmental footprint compared to conventional farming methods, the UNFCCC Secretariat and a lot of the leaders within this field have started to adopt it and advocate for it even more heavily than they have previously. Of course, there is an economic cost associated with organic production, and I think Yasmin's paper talks a lot about the kind of leadership, especially required in order to transit into this kind of method. But it is something that we're seeing take a lot more force today. Finally, I think it's important to acknowledge that there are financial mechanisms that readily make this possible, such as the Green Climate Fund, which is crucial for supporting sustainable practices and providing the financial backing that is needed for farmers to transition into this more sustainable climate resilient methods of farming. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, as well as the Asian Development Bank, both also currently have projects ongoing that help with climate resilient farming, in particular in areas that they both operate in. So it's very interesting to see the financial ecosystem as well kind of come and put their weight behind this. The conferences of the parties are meetings of all the parties who agree to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and they meet once a year. This is arguably too much for a lot of people and can often change or tweak the discourse far too quickly than research is progressing. However, there are a few key decisions that are useful to highlight over here, and I've only picked a few recent decisions that I think have been of escalating importance in light of the 2015 decision to adopt the Paris Agreement at COP21. This clearly created a global effort to limit temperature rise, which is 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, and recognize the need for climate resilient development, which indirectly supports sustainable agricultural practices by advocating for lower emissions across all sectors, including agriculture. Following that, at COP23 at Bonn, there was a landmark in agriculture-related climate policy with the establishment of the Coronivia Joint Work on Agriculture, which brought specific attention to agriculture in a way that never had been done before, acknowledging its dual role both as a victim and as a contributor to climate change. I find it very interesting that the painting of farmers is often as a contributor and not as much as a victim, or it tilts the other way without acknowledging the balance that exists and the kind of solutions that we need and the kind of creative innovations we require. The Coronivia resolution emphasized sustainable land and water management, which is vital for organic agriculture as well. At COP24 in Katowice, this built on all of this momentum and emphasized the implementation of the Paris Agreement through the Katowice Climate Package, which, when it was adopted, provided specific guidelines for enacting the nationally determined contributions and encouraged nations to include sustainable agricultural practices in their climate action plans. And work that's been done on the NDCs has revealed that over 100 nationally determined contributions do actually contain mentions of agricultural practices. However, we will only find out during this process at COP28 of the global stock take how much effort has actually taken place with respect to this. And finally, COP25 at Madrid advocated for higher ambition and more developing country support. This is not, I think, this obviously stops in 2019, but at the COP in Glasgow in 2021 and in Egypt in 2022, something I'll come to in a minute, what we've also seen is that this higher ambition acknowledges this phenomenon of land use and the intricate relationship that exists between the way land use is changing, the way forest cover is changing, and the way food security is directly impacted. The Food and Agricultural Organization's policy briefs ahead of every COP emphasize the fact that the dangers or the consequences of all decisions taken at the COP will fall squarely on farmers, which I think is something is the clear message that people have. But there has been a shifting focus at COP discussions that I think is important to highlight. There's a shift towards adaptation and resilience, which means that the amount of support that is now available for adaptation strategies for the agricultural sector, recognizing especially the vulnerabilities of farmers in developing countries, is much higher now. There's an emphasis on sustainable development and sustainable practices, especially post the Paris Agreement and the 2015 adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals as well, which includes things like organic farming, agroforestry, and conservation agriculture, which help in carbon sequestration and improve biodiversity, contributing therefore both to mitigation as well as adaptation goals. And finally, the amount of financial support that has become available is significantly higher than there has ever been before, as I touched on slightly earlier. The other parts that I think are worth mentioning is the fact that there is also a heavier focus on the integration of indigenous knowledge, acknowledging the role of traditional and indigenous knowledge in sustainable farming, but also recognizing that these local practices may hold the keys to resilience and sustainability when matched with traditional science, when matched with science in the way that we understand it. There's also a heavier focus on a holistic approach to food systems, not just agriculture, but also sustainable production and sustainable consumption, which involves, I think, a greater amount of partnership and a greater amount of work with the private sector at large. I'd like to then, with this context, touch on a few outcomes that came out of COP27. Something that I think is really, people misunderstand, especially the kind of impact that COP27 has had because of the kind of tenor that was around the COP before COP27 happened. The expectations that were on COP27 were far more limited than previous COPs, especially as a result of the challenges of taking on the presidency in a country that itself is facing tremendous challenges with respect to climate change and has such a range of landscapes, but also because of the political nature of the nation itself, something that has similarly come up with the United Arab Emirates as well with respect to the COP presidency. But with COP27, some of the outcomes that were achieved are truly quite remarkable. We've had first, for example, the establishment of a 4-year work plan on agriculture and food security, with the Coronavia Joint Work on Agriculture continuing and being renewed. We also had the launch of Food and Agriculture for Sustainable Initiative, the FAST initiative, which aims to mobilize climate finance to basically transform agriculture and food systems by 2030, supporting adaptation and maintaining a 1.5-degree pathway while bolstering food and economic security. So 1.5 degrees may not be something that's agreed on in the cover text, but it's clear in the context of food security and agriculture that everyone agrees on it. And finally, the recognition of the importance of organic farming, because COP27 outcomes documents and meeting records both highlight the potential of organic farming to enhance soil health, improve water retention, and boost biodiversity. This is also a part of the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's efforts in redoubling down on nature-based solutions and finding solutions to these problems within the natural ecosystem itself. And that has been something that's been hugely empowering. With this context, I would now like to move to a few anticipated outcomes. What I think we're going to see in general through COP28 this year, which starts next week, with the 10th of December being Food Day, effectively, Food and Agricultural Day, is strengthened international cooperation on food systems transformation. It may seem obvious that states who meet regularly, who meet once a year for climate change processes, should enhance their international cooperation. However, with the Coronavia, with the 4-year work program, and this being the end of year 1 of that program, also coinciding with the global stock take, the amount of aspiration that I hold at least is quite high. We're also going to see the announcement of increased finance for climate smart agriculture. This is something that the presidency itself has been pushing because the United Arab Emirates government has enacted nature-based solutions in all of its farms and all of its farming practices, specifically in Al Quwain, something that I think is going to be highlighted through the COP. I also believe that we're going to see enhanced support for organic farming and a lot of capacity building initiatives that speak to technology transfer and organic farming. This is based on the pre-COP that's just taken place and the statements that were delivered both by the Food and Agricultural Organization, but also the United Nations Development Program on the same. And finally, I think that with the last three, I'd like to take them together. I think first, the COP outcomes document is likely going to address food loss and waste as a whole system, something they've done with COP27 as well. But in light of Sustainable Development Goal 12, which was also discussed at the high-level political forum in the summer, we anticipate a lot more systemic thinking that is going to come out of COP28, which is likely going to lead to a greater amount of empowerment for smallholder farms, and equally promote the amount of gender equality and participation that takes place within agricultural processes. Something that has historically not been done at the COP is something that I anticipate to see this year, just based on trends that we're looking at the moment. I'd like to conclude with a few notes on relationships with other COPs because it's very easy to take this out of context and assume that everything that happens at the climate change COP is going to be enough. Um, there's one COP that's just happened, which is COP 15 on biodiversity, which has emphasized the importance of biodiversity in agriculture, which naturally means that any decision that a human being takes with respect to biodiversity impacts sustainable use and impacts the kind of agricultural diversity that's available, which is crucial for agriculture and food security both. But also, the COP on desertification has had a significant focus. This is the one that's taking place in Riyadh next year. Is going to have a significant focus on the kind of on both desertification but also land degradation, issues which are critical as we know for agriculture. Because land degradation can directly threaten food production, especially in semi-arid regions, which go under-noticed when you focus on the arid regions. These decisions taken as a whole, I think, provide a suite of decisions that we can look at to engage with cross-COP collaboration or understanding food systems in a more holistic way. Because what we're going to see is support for farmers that comes out of each of these individual COPs and likely leading to greater obligations on states themselves from each of these conventions to improve the amount of finance that's available to tackle all of these food insecurity problems at the source, at the agricultural level itself. And on a broader level, with the triple planetary crisis and with all of the threats that we face, I personally think that approaching agriculture through an individual lens or looking at it exclusively from the climate change perspective sees a missed opportunity in the amount of policy integration that you can adopt. Because you can, especially in crafting policy for the future, you can craft an individual policy that tackles your climate ambitions, your climate obligations, your desertification obligations, and biodiversity obligations, something that people are currently missing out on. And with that, thank you for listening to me and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Tejas, in fact, both of you. Thank you so much. A very quick question before we open up, which could probably lead to a bigger discussion. But how do we make sure that we can enforce, the various legislation and obligations, both on traditional knowledge that we've mentioned, biodiversity, and of course also with the private sector. I mean, we see that we keep moving backward in a way when we deal with the private sector, like the waste we've just seen in these days, the waste obligations. How can we actually really have a real international cooperation and enforce?
So I think I can start on this and then I'd invite Yasemin to please add on this from the private sector's perspective, because that's not something I have any knowledge of. So international law is inherently, I'm an optimist and a believer in international law, but I also understand that it's got huge limitations because it's very limited in its enforcement capabilities and it relies on huge amount of political goodwill. However, all of these systems have implementation and compliance procedures, which are effectively international naming and shaming procedures, where you can call on states or report states for not actually meeting their thresholds. We're starting to see this take place because the Paris Agreement Implementation and Compliance Committee actually took cognizance of 3 reports on its own over the course of this year for the first time. And we're starting to see these implementation and compliance committees take a bit more proactive steps in taking almost suo motu cognizance and bringing the attention to the world to the fact that a state is actually not meeting its obligations. And I think that's one way, but another way that's starting to be explored, which is having a better impact, is almost the divergence of finance from, or the divestment of finance from a place that is not meeting its ambitions. You're seeing the World Bank, the EBRD, the ADB, the Green Climate Fund, whichever fund you name almost at the moment, moving money away from countries that are not able to meet their climate ambition and starting off with smaller projects to see if they're actually committed to doing so. And I think both of those tools working together actually form a very interesting balance. Yasmin, how do you see it from the private sector?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. I mean, I could see that this is sort of it's a system where self-regulation plays a role, government regulation plays a role, and also activism, as well as pressures companies face from increasingly, I think, in the investment community, like large institutional investors are increasingly imposing certain goals and demands on ESG, sort of environment, social governance. And so we see increased, somewhat reactive, but also some proactive moves across sectors in these directions, whether it's to reduce impact, carbon footprint, and various other measures, kind of taking a more stakeholder view as opposed to a very strict shareholder view. But I think that's one side of the story, and I think in some cases, because corporate reputation is also at stake, you do see some of the self-regulation, and sometimes in clusters or industry groups, and we do see this in the food sector, companies coming together and then agreeing to certain level of goals, reducing their impact in a multitude of ways. But of course, these are self-regulated, so in that sense, enforcement is not strict, right? So and I think customers, of course, can play a big role in terms of when they prefer certain types of foods over others. And but I have to say, like, for organic food is concerned, like in the US, its market share is about 6%, so it's still kind of a niche. In UK, it's like 1 to 2%, right? And some of it is, of course, it is more expensive, but it's also trade-offs in terms of how individuals might prioritize where they spend their disposable income. But I think the government ultimately plays a very important role. I mean, we've seen this like in the regulations around electric vehicles as well. Any type of subsidies, mandates, all of these play an important role. For organic food. The legislation does provide some protection. So when companies make the claims, when they make the investments, it protects them from other companies and sellers that might call a product organic, but it really isn't. It's kind of maybe a marketing gimmick, or it's just completely, wrong information. But I have also read a lot of criticisms, from some, like these, especially independently small to medium scale farmers, that they're in some cases against governments regulating these things, because anything government regulates can also it's subject to its own corrupt systems, because these are very political. Every issue becomes political. So things can get watered down when it comes to the definition of what qualifies organic, and how can you get the certification, and so on and so forth. So but again, it's like, I think there are multiple factors that play into the effectiveness and the need for regulation.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. And of course, this leads to a much bigger discussion, right? But let's leave it there, because I'm sure there are lots of questions and comments. Who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Martin.
Well, thanks very much for two very stimulating presentations. If I could stick with organic food for a bit, what both presentations have shown is that the concept of organic food has socioeconomic power and has utility in the kind of discourse that is necessary to have action. It also has to be said, I think it's true to say, it's scientifically very weak concept. In fact, I think it may actually fall more easily into the concept of our traditional knowledge than anything scientific. And one of the things that really shows that up is, I think Yasemin gave us one of the agreed definitions, which was essentially a list of villains, a list of things that organic food is not. And I feel like, kind of conceptually, that's inevitably going to be a weakness that's going to show up. And I wonder whether there's a separate discourse discussing what organic food is. I mean, the various lists of villains change, you know, as a few decades back, chemical fertilizers weren't on the villains, now they are. So the list of villains isn't static. But would you agree, for it to have potency, it needs to have a bit of scientific structure that it doesn't have at the moment, and it needs to be something rather than just not a list of not this, if you see what I mean?
I could say a few things to that, and I'll let Tejas follow. I think it is true. It is sort of elimination of it's a long list of things that actually can't be there, right? You know, so and I actually don't find that right. It's an elimination of things. You know, it's because I think it became, when you look at the conventional agricultural today, modern agriculture today, the use of fertilizers, the use of pesticides have become pretty much the standard. So I think a definition that actually suggests going back to a time period, you know, when some of these you know, chemicals were not around, which is a long time, I guess, you know, at least half a century, maybe more. So I think that distinction is actually a quite, not only a powerful one, but actually from in terms of what currently the systems are extremely entrenched, you know, and everything is geared towards maximizing productivity in the short run, you know, and at the expense of, you know, okay, we can use all the fertilizers, they're petroleum based, you know, and then we combine that with pesticides. They're also petroleum based, but you know, they cause this toxic residue. It goes hand in hand with sort of monocrops kind of an idea. That itself, I think, is sort of, because it interferes with the biodiversity, it actually increases, it weakens the plants, you know, it makes them more susceptible to harmful, you know, insects. So it's a system of activities, and we are currently entrenched in these systems. All the company capabilities and resources in food production are organized around this as a system. So in that sense, when you start taking certain things out of it, and you know, it is a pretty dramatic, radical redefinition of the farming, going back to what it used to be. But I think some of the also newer definitions, what they have added is also like animal friendly farming practices, you know, like let's say it's chicken farming, you know, it's in terms of, you know, the whether it's cage free or like the size of the cage, and you know, so that some of those also have been added to it. But I personally like the definition actually involving what is not or cannot be used is tremendously actually important. So I'll just stop there and have Tejas add to it.
No, I think I'd like to agree with that, because from a legislative perspective as well, what we're seeing with laws that try to regulate organic food production, they're almost worried of being behind the curve by trying to define or limit the scope of it by saying this is what it applies to. And in doing so, using the exclusionary list or using the mechanism of it does not apply to X, Y, or Z is often easier from a legislative perspective, and seems to be the route that they're going down. The Food and Agricultural Organization has a database or a lexicon of different laws on organic food in particular, and the only one that stands out that made a very bold attempt to define organic food or organic production was Mongolia's law. And that law suffered with tremendous implementation problems, but that's the only one that I can see that's on that database that's tried anything of that sort. So that's my 2 cents to add to
that. Do I have time to respond or not?
Yes, yes, please.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
Very quickly. No, I absolutely take Tejas' point that that the list of negatives works perfectly with legislation. I completely take that. In terms of Yasemin's points about the system, I think getting to a systemic structure rather than list-like structure is what I'm about. But to me, you put your finger on the systemic structure most, not when you talk about organic, but when you talked about productivity. So to me, the core issue here is how you that actually maximal productivity and sustainability are in competition. That's the thing, and the subtext of what this discussion is aiming at is how can we shift the emphasis from maximal productivity at any one place in time to collective sustainability. And I'll stop there, but my own feeling is if you purified it to that point, it would have the argument would have a strength, because that's it. If we're going to achieve sustainability in some other way, it would be a good way to take that path. So that's the core of the argument. It's the maximal productivity versus sustainability. But I'll shut up there because that's. But thank you for your answers.
No, I think, Martin, thank you. I think that makes sense. It's because I think what you just said, it does capture the spirit of it. It maybe outline all the reasons why, but essentially that there is a trade-off, between the maximum productivity, again, within a certain period of time, because I guess as soil degrades, in the future, we may be setting ourselves for actually terrible productivity or no productivity at all. But yes, I think it would be maybe put that in the definition and somehow, and that might actually also clarify the broader objective of why those things are taken out. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. Anyone else has questions or comments for either Yasemin or Tejas or both? Helen, yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah, thanks both for the talks, very interesting. Kind of on the same vein, with the idea of organic farming, I did like Martin's point about, moving what the kind of framework is, but I think that one of the questions I have around organic farming is that the productivity is still absolutely crucial. I mean, with a growing population and everything, so the productivity is still important, because then there becomes the question of like land use change. If you need to convert more land to agriculture to make up for a lower productivity and a lower output, and with Tejas saying that, like organic farming is seems to be kind of, one of the priorities in the COP meetings as to a way to introduce sustainability. I was wondering what your perspectives are on how we can kind of balance the productivity and the sustainability, because I think it's personally naive to not consider that the productivity is incredibly important still, even though obviously the way we're currently doing it is unsustainable and needs to change.
Well, thank you, Ellen. Can I throw in also the waste, Yasemin, because I think here, even it's your area.
Yeah, Tejas, do you want to go first? I mean,
No. I was going to defer to you because I think you have stronger responses.
So thank you, Ellen. I think that's the question, right? It's such an important question. I don't think we can ignore that, otherwise the world will go hungry. And so there are the big trade-offs. That said, I think what I'm thinking is that, with just like with any new technology, there are learning curve effects. So over time, some of the productivity can be recaptured. And I think this is already happening within organic farming systems. There are some economies of scale effects as well. Organic farming is still niche, at very small scale. In many cases, it is pursued by very small farmers that they struggle with certain inefficiencies, lack of funding, lack of subsidies and whatnot. So those can be partially improved. I think there is also built into some of the number calculations is the fact that, there has to be some drop, a significant drop, maybe a 50% drop in the meat consumption as well, which does then release more of the land to be produced to produce food that is directly consumed by humans rather than, you know, feeding the animals. So I think in the aggregate level, I think a number of changes have to happen before organic food can feed more of the people. And also, I think affordability is another very important one, you know, because currently organic food is more expensive. Some of that, again, well, in part, of course, that some of the price is also the true cost of conventional food systems hasn't been factored into the price that, you know, as consumers we are paying. But so I don't see any of these things can possibly change overnight. I think that would be suicide for all of us, you know, but I see it more sort of like, you know, maybe a pathway where maybe these systems somewhat, you know, converge, coexist for a while, and then as we develop the systems, as we develop technologies, you know, maybe organic actually takes over in the future, you know, at some point, and maybe it doesn't, I don't know, but I think that's sort of the trajectory that I do see, that these coexist for a while, and but maybe that there is transition, they're going in opposite direction.
Thanks, that was a great answer.
Thank you, Ellen. And thank you, Yasemin. And of course, I think we shouldn't forget the waste as well, right, Yasemin? Because if we could address that, then at production already.
Excellent point. I think considering that, you know, anywhere from, depending on the specific food location and part of the supply chain, 30 to 50% of the food that gets produced is discarded, is lost somewhere along the value chain. I mean, it's a humongous loss. Not always the easiest to recover at every point, but again, you know, there's low-hanging fruits. There's some we have to work really hard to recover. Some we may never be able to recover, but there's huge loss of productivity there as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry that we've come to the end, and I know that Tejas has to go, so we can't really keep him, otherwise you miss your flight. So thank you so much, everyone. It was great. This is the last of our seminars for this term, so we'll start again at the end of January. You'll find all the you know, the new titles on our website, and I'm sure I'll send you as soon as possible an email with all the titles and the dates. But thank you so much, everyone. I can't really say Happy Christmas yet. That's far too early. So I will do that in an email closer to the time. But have a good weekend, at least I can say that.
Thanks, everyone.
And have a productive meeting, Tejas. I hope that things go well down at COP.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Francesca. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Yasemin.
No,
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you, safe travels. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you.